1 and 2 Samuel this morning, and Chris will read about 3 readings from 1 Samuel. Thank you very much, Chris.
Reading from 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 to 2 and 6 to 10. Then Hannah prayed and said, "My heart rejoices in the Lord my horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. The Lord brings death and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and raises up. The Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honour. For the foundations of the earth are the Lord's. Upon them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his saints, but the wicked will be silenced in darkness. It is not by strength that one prevails. Those who oppose the Lord will be shattered. He will thunder against them from heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. And from chapter 17, verses 41 to 47. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give you your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. There is no one holy like the Lord. There was no one holy like you. You send poverty and you send wealth. You humble and you exalt. This morning, 1 and 2 Samuel. Last time was Ruth. So the book that follows is 1 and 2 Samuel. I say 1 and 2 Samuel because originally it was 1 and 2 Samuel were one book, just as 1 and 2 Kings were one book. 1 Chronicles 29:29 tells who wrote 1 and 2 Samuel. It was a combined effort between Samuel and Gad the seer and Nathan the prophet. We have been engaging in biblical theology, which is the study of God by studying the Bible. Biblical theologians regard the Bible as one book, one story, one plot, one theme, one character, namely the triune God, and vis-a-vis us. And if we have been following the thread of the plot up until now. brief recap of where we have come from. The Lord promised the guilty three, Adam and Eve and Satan, that the seed of the woman would crush the seed of the serpent, and the seed of the woman would somehow establish the kingdom of God, God's kingdom, God's reign. And 2,000 years elapsed, and he called Abraham, and about 2000 BC, and he promised Abraham 3 unconditional promises: that he would greatly multiply Abraham's seed, he would give Abraham the land, and the whole world would be blessed by Abraham through Abraham's seed. From time to time, in the first 5 books of Moses, we get the hint that the Lord will do this through a king that he is going to raise up. The significance of the development of the plot in 1 and 2 Samuel is that the worship of the Lord was moved from Ramah, where the tabernacle was, to Jerusalem, where the temple would be built. Another great development and the plot of the story is Israel's leadership went from judges to kings. And there's a song at the beginning of 1 Samuel, and then there's a song at the end of 2 Samuel. Hannah's song in the beginning of 1 Samuel, from which Chris read, and David's song at the end of 2 Samuel. And scholars call them, the 2 songs, 2 inclusios. They call them inclusios because they're like bookends. Everything between the 2 bookends it's included. The whole book is included between the 2 inclusios. And scholars will also tell you that if you understand the theme of the 2 songs, that will give you the key to the theme of the whole book. And the theme of both Hannah and David's song is: the Lord lifts up the humble, and he pulls down the proud and the strong and the godless. In a nutshell. So there was no one holy like the Lord. There was no one holy like you. You send poverty and you send wealth. You humble and you exalt. You lift the poor from the dust, and you pull down the strong and the godless. I want us to take home this morning that essential point, that if in the battle of life, if you keep on doing what's right, doing what's good, doing what's biblical, doing what the Lord wants you to do, in time he will raise you up, and he will remove in his time the forces, the person, the people, the things that are godless and powerful and compromising you. In his time. So I want to look briefly at 3 stories in 1 and 2 Samuel which embody that truth. The first story, I call it Ichabod. The two sons of Eli were called Hophni and Phinehas, and they were priests. They were priests in the tabernacle of God, but they were wicked and brutal men. For example, the worshippers would bring their meat as an offering to the Lord, and the Hophni and Phinehas would just grab it, brutally grab the meat and eat it themselves. They would treat the women who were working in the tabernacle of God as prostitutes. So God promised that he would take the priesthood away from the house of Eli. He would slay Hophni and Phinehas, and he would raise up somebody who was on his heart. All this judgment came down like a ton of bricks one day in Israel. The Philistine army attacked the Israelite army. The Ark of the Covenant was captured. Hophni and Phinehas were slain, and all the while Phinehas' wife was giving birth to a son. And when they told her that the Ark of the Covenant had been captured, she said, "Oh, the glory of the Lord has departed." And she was later to die in childbirth, but not before she had called her baby son, the Lord, the glory has departed. Ichabod, which means the glory has departed. Imagine being called the glory has departed. And the Lord raised up Samuel's mother Hannah dedicated Samuel to the Lord. Samuel dedicated himself to the Lord, and the Lord raised him up. So we read Samuel grew in favor of God and man, and we read that the Lord blessed him, so that none of Samuel's words ever fell to the ground. I would like that for me. I would like it if none of my words ever proved false. But that's what the Lord had raised up the humble, and he had pulled down the godless and the wicked. In the battle of life, if you keep doing what is right, keep doing what is biblical, what the Lord wants of you, patiently, humbly trusting in the Lord will in his time raise you up, and he will remove in his time the godless and the powerful entities, people, things that are compromising you for his glory. The next story is arguably the most well-loved and most famous story in the whole Bible, certainly the Old Testament, David and Goliath. David defeated Goliath not by conventional weaponry, such as sword and spear and javelin and shield, but by a sling and a stone. Therefore, thereby illustrating the point that when David makes in 1 Samuel 17:47, the Lord saved not by spear or javelin. In Goliath, the Lord made small some one who was tall. Goliath was, scholars say that Goliath was 9'3". The tallest man in modern day is a man called Robert Wadlow. He was 9'1". And I have seen, in London, I have seen footage of him walking. But he was walking in a most ungainly, awkward manner. He was just hauling himself along because Robert Wadlow was he was ill. He was compromised. He had a disease called gigantism. I've placed my hand in his handprint, and I've put my foot in his footprint. Massive handprint, massive footprint. But he was ill, poor man, and he died young. But Goliath was about 3 inches taller than even Robert Wadlow, but there was nothing wrong and nothing unhealthy about Goliath. He was sound and wind and limb, and he was strong and he was wicked. He cursed David, who was made in the image of God, and he cursed David's God, and then entered David. When David entered the scene, the seed of the woman entered, and David's first action as king, remember, he had been anointed as king, even though he hadn't been crowned as king at that point, but he had certainly been anointed as king. His first action as king and warrior is to strike down and behead the monstrous giant whose speech echoed the serpent's speech. The Lord had raised up the humble, and he had pulled down the godless and the powerful and the wicked. In your battle with life, keep doing what the Lord wants you to do. Keep humbly and faithfully obeying the Lord, acting biblically, and doing what's right, doing what's good. And in His time, He will raise you up, and He will pull down them in His time the compromising forces of godlessness and wickedness, which are opposing you in the moment, in His time, for His glory. The third story, once again, centers around David. David had many sons, to many wives, and one of the sons was particularly handsome. He had long hair, and in fact he had his hair cut every year, and his hair was heavy. He must have been beautiful and handsome, and his hair was heavy. He got in the hair that was shorn from his head every year, 5 shekels of hair from his head. His name was Absalom, as you know, and he was vain and proud, and he wanted his father's throne. He wanted his father's crown, and so he launched a coup against his own father, and the coup was almost successful. So successful that it appeared to be, for a time, David was constrained to flee his palace, followed by a small retinue of followers, and at midnight, and then he lifted up his voice and lamented aloud, and as he was crossing the Kidron brook. And imagine having somebody, your crown, your throne, being stolen from you by your own son. And as if that wasn't bad enough, a man called Shimei was following on behind him, keeping at a safe distance, and pelting David with stones, and swearing and cursing at him. David's nephew Abishai wanted to discipline Shimei. In fact, he wanted to cut his head off, but David turned around and said, "No, we're not going to do that." Shimei's cursing of me might be from the Lord, and if it's from the Lord, we can't do anything about it. So David entrusted himself to the words of Hannah's song, that the Lord will raise up the humble and pull down the proud. And David believed that by absorbing Shimei's curses, the Lord will turn the curses into blessings. And you know the story. And eventually Absalom's hair was his downfall, and he was killed. The Lord had pulled down the godless and the proud, and even Shimei in time was disciplined. In your battle with life, keep doing what is right. Keep doing what is biblical, and the Lord will raise you up in His time, and He will remove the godless, the powerful, the wicked that are compromising you in the moment. That's those are the three stories, but I want to just add a footnote. Once again, centered around David. David was, as you know, persecuted and harassed by King Saul, who was jealous of him. In time, he accumulated a following of men who were disenfranchised, disinherited, disillusioned with Saul, and they formed a little army around David. But David was... They must have got to him in the end, constantly being harassed by Saul. So in time, David went over to the Philistines and he asked for succor. He asked for refuge. He pretended to be mad, and he allowed the spittle to run down into his beard. And the Philistines took pity on him, and they gave him the little village of Ziklag to harbor in. So David and his wife, his children, his men were living in Ziklag. But David, his problem was, what say the Philistine army attack the Israelite army? What am I going to do then? And then the day came when the Philistine army did attack, and the commander of the Philistine army trusted David. He shouldn't have trusted David. He was naive to trust David. But his men, his lieutenants, were not so naive, and they said to the Achish, the Philistine commander, we're not going to fight alongside David. Not to remember, he was the one who killed Goliath. He'll just turn on us when the fighting is thick. Send him home. So the Philistine commander went up to David and said, "Excuse me, sorry about that. The lead came out. He went up to David and said, I personally trust you, but my men don't. So I'm going to have to ask you to go back to Ziklag until the fighting is over, which was the very thing that David wanted to happen. So David and his men went back to Ziklag, and they found the Ziklag burnt to the ground with all their dependents, wives and children, having been kidnapped by the Amalekites. So once again, David's world came crashing around his shoulders. His wives and children were gone. But as if that wasn't bad enough, his men blamed him and wanted to stone him. So David was greatly distressed, and that in this circumstances. But we read in 1 Samuel 30 verse 6, David encouraged himself in the Lord. 1 Samuel 30 verse 6, David encouraged himself in the Lord. And it seems to me that the spirit of lawlessness is rising in this day and age. I don't know how much it will continue to rise in our day and age, but it's getting increasingly more difficult for Christians to be Christians publicly. We don't mind you being a Christian, but just private, please, and keeping to yourself. But Christians have an increasingly hard time being Christians publicly, and their Christian voice going out in the public square. And I can see the creaturely comfort being one by one removed from Christians, as Christians find it increasingly hard to be a Christian and be a faithful Christian, obeying the Lord in this day and age, when it's increasingly more godless. So I can see the time coming. I don't know when. Maybe it's a long way down the track. I don't know. But I can see the time coming when the Lord will wean his people from the comforts of this world. And naturally, this will be distressing. But remember, 1 Samuel 30 verse 6, David encouraged himself in the Lord. So, when the time comes, encourage yourself in the Lord. The Lord might take away all your creaturely comforts, leaving you with just him, but encourage yourself in the Lord. And do what's right, do what's biblical, do what's humble, and in time the Lord will remove the godless, the wicked, the powerful, and everybody that opposing you, just as he removed the Assyrians, and then the Babylonians, and then the Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans, and then who were oppressing his people. And now in time, in his time, he will remove and judge the world of Babylon, which is drunk with the blood of the saints. He will remove it, and he will lift you up in his time. Amen.